Depression is one of the most dangerous and insidious mental disorders. She, like a vampire, silently creeps up on her victims and sucks the vitality out of them. Like a vampire, major depression can kill its victim. Fortunately, the night bloodsucker is a fiction. Unfortunately, too many people think that depression is also a fiction. They say that insidious doctors and pharmacists are hooking naive people on antidepressants in order to earn billions of dollars. Too often, victims of depression hear that they suffer from nonsense, from idleness, that they just need to keep themselves busy. The level of usefulness of such advice is not just near zero. It generally breaks through the bottom and rolls down to negative values. Let's figure out together what depression is, why it is deadly, and why there are so many myths around it. Depression is one of the most common mental illnesses in the world. There are approximately 265 million people with clinical depression. In fact, there are even more of them. It's just that many people don't seek qualified help, and some do not even suspect that they have depression. The number of patients is growing from year to year, and not only because there is more stress in the modern world. At the same time, the quality of psychological care is growing, at least in developed countries. Better diagnosis. Consequently, more patients are identified. If previously moderate and borderline conditions were simply not noticed and were not treated accordingly, now doctors pay attention to them. In the United States, for example, every 12th citizen faces clinical depression. There are no clear statistics in the post-Soviet space. Records are kept only in certain regions. But even from scattered data, it's clear that the situation is no better. For example, in some regions of Russia, about a third of residents suffered from a depressive disorder at least once in their lives. According to the World Health Organization, depression consistently ranks among the 12 leading causes of disability in the world, causing billions in losses to the global economy. Why, given such a scale of disaster, is the disease not given due attention? Most likely, the reason is in relation to depression as a phenomenon. Many people believe that depression is just a synonym for long-term bad mood caused by some difficult event in life. For example, the loss of a loved one. Over time, a person supposedly returns to normal, and new experiences and hobbies seem to speed up this process. In fact, clinical depression does not go away without treatment. With willpower and positive emotions, you can drive away the blues. But this is not how you can cope with real depression. How can you tell if it's depression or just a lingering bad mood? Unfortunately, laboratory methods for diagnosing depression have not yet been invented. You cannot take blood for analysis, do a cardiogram or ultrasound, put the patient in an MRI machine, and determine for sure that he has depression. True, methods of blood testing for reactive protein and interleukin are now being developed, which can potentially diagnose depression with high accuracy. But so far, as in the last century, the only diagnostic method is a frank conversation with the patient. A psychiatrist makes a diagnosis of depression based on the results of a patient interview, if the symptoms and signs described by the patient match those contained in the International Classification of Diseases or the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. The key symptoms of depression are prolonged negative emotions. People with depression experience them most of the day for at least 2 weeks. So, a couple of days of bad mood is not depression. Stable bad mood regardless of circumstances. A person suffers emotionally for no apparent reason, out of the blue. Severe stress or life tragedy can be a trigger for depression. But very often the reaction to them seems to be spread out over time. It seems that the person has already experienced all this, solved the problems, returned to normal life, and then suddenly it hits him. Moreover, everyone can be covered in their own way. Some people's self-esteem drops sharply. Some begin to see their future exclusively in black. Some begin to bite themselves for the mistakes of the past, and some feel physical manifestations for some unknown reason. One of the most important causes of depression is a biochemical malfunction in the body. A bad mood is just one of its consequences. Another consequence is sleep disturbance. The patient either suffers from insomnia or, conversely, from constant drowsiness. The same thing with appetite. Either it's complete loss or regular gluttons and overeating. Other common symptoms and signs of depression: sudden causeless weight loss, decreased sexual desire, chronic fatigue, problems consenting. It is difficult for a person to even take care of himself, let alone work. Some patients cannot even make tea for themselves because it requires them to exert all their physical and mental strength. It's the same with communication. A depressed person doesn't want to see even the closest people. You need to understand that episodes of depression can be either an independent negative phenomenon or part of other disorders. For example, manic depressive psychosis, also known as bipolar disorder, fatal depressive disorder, anxiety disorder, or other diseases. So, what is the cause of depression? Where does it come from? Ancient Greeks believed that long periods of bad mood were caused by an excess of black bile in the body. It was proposed to treat this with bloodletting and physical exercise. By the way, black bile in ancient Greek is melancholy. This is what depression was called right up until the 19th century. In the Middle Ages, it was believed that such a misfortune was caused by demons. Accordingly, it must be treated with prayer and fasting, and in especially severe cases, with exorcism. In modern times, doctors began to explain everything with various psychological reasons, from lack of self-discipline to conflict between consciousness and subconsciousness. The exact causes of depression are still unknown. However, it has been precisely established that, contrary to stereotypes, this disease is not caused by psychological problems, but by completely physiological reasons. The main theory at the moment is that depression is a consequence of a malfunction in the metabolism of neurotransmitters. These chemicals are involved in transmitting signals between neurons, activating the desired receptors. The same neuron can transmit different information to its neighbor depending on the number and composition of neurotransmitters it releases. Information is transmitted through special contact points, synapses. All this is reminiscent of a corporate computer network, where neurons are employee computers, synapses are mail servers, and neurotransmitters are letters. When instructions contained in letters reach employees with significant distortions, sooner or later the company plunges into chaos. The same thing happens with the human brain. During depression, several neurotransmitters, monoamines, norepinephrine, serotonin, dopamine, enter synapses in incorrect concentrations. Since each patient has his own concentration, the totality and intensity of depression symptoms is also different for everyone. Each neurotransmitter is responsible for its own area, and accordingly, their deficiency gives a different clinical picture. So a lack of serotonin causes anxiety, worry, and fear, and a lack of dopamine causes a lack of motivation, apathy, and lethargy. In fact, everything is much more complicated. The exact connections between neurotransmitters are not yet fully understood. But in general terms, everything works something like this. There is another theory of the occurrence of depression, which is closely related to the phenomenon of neuroplasticity. The connections between neurons are not permanent. They are constantly created and destroyed as a result of new experiences that the brain receives and processes. This process of making and breaking neural connections is called neuroplasticity. Chronic stress and negative emotions shorten the processes of neurons and reduce their number. Consequently, the neuroplasticity of the brain and all its high-level functions, memory, thinking, and the ability to concentrate, suffer, and depression sets in. For some reason, it is generally accepted that patients with depression necessarily have visible signs of grief and suffering. In fact, most people suffering from depression try to hide their condition, especially our society, where it is not customary to widely discuss their psychological problems and ask for help. There is even so-called laughing depression, When a person walks around, jokes, carries on conversations on any topic, and then, for no apparent reason, tries to commit suicide, those around you then wonder, how did this happen? In addition, depression is not always synonymous with grief and suffering. Often this is something like freezing all feelings and emotions, both positive and negative. It's not bad for a person. It's not bad for a person because the neurotransmitters don't work as they should. A patient with severe depression loses all settings that relate to joy, motivation, and reward. For example, for him the options go to work, lie on the couch and look at the ceiling, and go to a cafe with your loved one are absolutely equivalent emotionally. Nothing makes you happy. Nothing makes you sad. There is neither black nor white, just pure grayness. Intellectually, a person understands that going to a cafe with friends is better than going to work. But there is no emotional confirmation of this. This is about the same as losing the ability to taste food. Thanks to past experience, you will know that strawberries taste better than stale bread. But, in fact, you will no longer notice the difference. Many people think that problems with emotions and thinking are not so scary. True, some patients with depression are capable of self-harm and suicide, but there seem to be not so many of them. In fact, you need to understand that depression is a disease, and a terrible disease. Not only is it capable of completely destroying a person's psyche and social life, but it also has quite physical manifestations, such as phantom pain. Problems with neurotransmitters can cause sensations of physical pain in the head, stomach, limbs, anywhere really. Moreover, any examinations and tests will show that the diseased organs are normal, but the patient will still experience discomfort. The stronger the depression, the stronger the phantom pain. Fortunately, this also works in the opposite direction. If the patient is cured of depression, these pains go away. Decreased immunity. Depression weakens the immune system by inhibiting T lymphocytes, killer cells of viruses, bacteria, and other foreign agents. Increased likelihood of cardiovascular disease. With depression, the level of stress hormones, adrenaline and norepinephrine increases, which causes increased heart rate, constriction of blood vessels, and increased blood pressure with extremely negative consequences for the cardiovascular system, including strokes and heart attacks. Inflammatory processes in the body. Depression often provokes systemic inflammatory diseases, allergies, intestinal inflammation, oncology, autoimmune inflammation of the brain, and other unpleasant things. Another myth about depression is that it is a disease exclusively of developed countries and wealthy people. Statistics show that in problem countries like Syria and Libya, the number of depressions per 100,000 population is higher than in prosperous countries like the UK, France, and Germany. The leader in the number of depression among the population is Afghanistan. Here, as they say, unnecessary comments. It is also not true that depression is a disease of the rich. It's just that wealthy people have the opportunity to seek qualified psychological help, so they are more often included in the statistics. People with lower incomes are often left alone with the disease. It is also important to understand that thinking and social abilities are affected by depression. Therefore, patients' careers often collapse. Consequently, they can no longer afford normal medicine and again full of the general statistics. How to get rid of depression? How is she treated? Is it possible to cope with depression on your own? Until the beginning of the 20th century, the main medicine for depression was laudanum, a 10% alcohol solution of opium. Fortunately, doctors have finally realized that treating depression with opiates is the same as putting out a fire with gasoline. True, there was no clear alternative to such a drug until the 1950s, when the first generation of antidepressants appeared, monoamine oxidase inhibitors (MAOs). They were discovered by accident when they were looking for new drugs for tuberculosis. The first MAO is acted extremely harshly, affecting the hormonal balance in the body and destroying the liver. The patient was prescribed a strict diet. He was forbidden to eat cheese, cream, chocolate, bananas, smoked meats. He was not allowed to drink beer, red wine, coffee, and violation of the diet threatened a heart attack or stroke. In 1956, a new type of antidepressant appeared, tricyclics TC. By chance, they also wanted to make a cure for allergies and colds, but received a cure for depression. Compared to MAOs, tricyclics have advanced, resulting in such effective drugs as clomipramine, selegiline, and amitriptyline, which are still used in the treatment of depression. The real revolution in the treatment of depression occurred in 1982, again by accident. Swedish researcher Arvid Carlson noticed that the allergy medicine produced by AstraZeneca has an excellent calming effect and shared his observations. As a result, based on this drug, the antidepressant Zoloft was created, which increased the concentration of serotonin, but did not affect the body's hormonal system as harshly as its predecessors. Zoloft became the first fundamentally new antidepressant, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor SSRI. Unfortunately, it also had side effects. In some cases, patients developed an acute neurological syndrome causing partial paralysis. Zoloft was banned, but pharmacists received a scientific basis for the development of new SSRIs. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, 3 effective drugs for depression appeared on the market that are still the mainstay medications today: paroxetine, sertraline, and fluoxetine, better known as Prozac. Their narrowly targeted action helps to obtain a serious treatment effect while avoiding side effects and intoxication. But the new generation of SSRIs is not perfect. Firstly, like all antidepressants, these are cumulative drugs. Patients' mood improves only in the 3rd week of treatment or later. Before this, a dangerous situation rises. The person's energy and willpower have already been unfrozen, but the mood is still lousy and very anxious. During this period, many patients may commit suicide to relieve anxiety. At the same time, tranquilizers are prescribed. Alas, in the post-Soviet space, the most effective anti-anxiety drugs are equated to drugs and are not available to patients. The second serious drawback of SSRIs is their lower effectiveness in severe depression than tricyclics. In terms of side effects, tricyclic drugs are worse, so research is now underway on new generations of antidepressants that work not only with the capture of serotonin, but also norepinephrine with dopamine.